Hey there, everyone. This is Matt Manacoro from MacProVideo.com and AskVideo.com. And I'm excited to check out Discovery Series India with you today. The latest expansion for your Kontakt library from Native Instruments. It's a pretty amazing Indian instrument that has both rhythmic and melodic elements as well. And everything has accompanying grooves and phrases that will really help you get the most out of this instrument, whether you want to play it with your hands or whether you want to trigger it with MIDI notes or trigger it in other ways. The instrumental sources are divided into three groups. There's one ensemble, which I've got loaded up right here. There are 9 percussion instruments and 6 melodic instruments. They're available in the NKI folders here on the left-hand side. As I said, I've got the ensemble loaded up right now. I'm going to hit the play button here that I can trigger with a MIDI note or the play button and just take a listen to this groove that uses a variety of different instruments and elements. That's some pretty cool stuff, and there's a lot going on there. It's important to remember that there are no audio loops here. Everything that you're hearing is generated via MIDI and triggering the sample instruments, so that when you speed up or slow down the groove, the sound quality is going to remain at a high level because we're not stretching the audio, we're just speeding up the MIDI groove. Now, I've got a variety of different snapshots I can use in addition to loading up the ensemble. So right here, a snapshot is, well, it's a picture of the settings, the mixer settings, groove settings, scale settings. Could be lots of different elements inside of a snapshot. In this case, what I'll do is I'm going to go from the Lakshmi snapshot that I'm in right now to a different one. I think I'll go to something a little more sparse, the Rukmini one. So I'll pick that. And what's going to change is the grooves, the elements of the instruments that are being used, the mix of the instruments. So right away, even just playing the first groove, there's a lot of different elements. You're hearing some melodic elements that weren't there before. They're being used in a different way. The mix is different. And in addition to the snapshots, you can also open up various sound presets, which are, I like to think of as mini snapshots. So if I open up the mixer here and I go to the upper right corner, I'm using a modern sound preset right now. And it's also good to keep in mind that there are lots of classical Indian elements here, but there's also lots of modern Indian elements, contemporary stuff too. So the rhythms and the instruments and the mixes can all be modified to range from classic to modern. So when I pick a different snapshot, you'll notice that the mix changes entirely. The volumes of the different instruments change, the pan, the ambient space that they're in changes. So you can really change things around if you listen as I'm playing. Pick a couple of different mixes. There's lots of different ways that you might want to mix those same elements of sound. On the mixer, you'll notice that there is one instrument per channel. So I've got a couple of different channels here. I can go to my second page of channels and take a look at the instruments there. Now, while I'm looking at that, I mean, you might not be sure about what a tabla is or what a ghatam is. So if you're still learning that, you might want to go to the ensemble window, and then I can click on any one of those instruments and spotlight it. So I'll go to the ghatam right here. I can see a little preview of that particular instrument. Now, of course, many of these instruments have tons of different articulations, but it's just helpful to isolate which element of the groove you might want to adjust in the mix if you're not 100% sure yet. It's also important to remember that you're in control here. You have access to these instruments and to play them as you like. So you don't have to use the grooves. I mean, I can open up the MIDI mapping and play the notes just as I would any traditional instrument. But before we do that, let's just dive into the grooves and customize them a little bit. So I'll click this question mark here and take a look at the keyboard mapping. And right away, I can see, even for a sitar, it's only using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keys. There's a lot more to a sitar than that, and I do have access to the full sitar if I want it in India. But in this particular case, for this groove, that's what they need to trigger the different sitar runs that are happening. So I've got lots of instruments, lots of notes here reserved for the tablas, lots of them reserved for the ghatam. And as I hit them, you'll see the name of the type of articulation appear down at the bottom, which will also be really handy. Now, I can also open up the guitar on its own if I want full access to it. So if I'm worried that, this amount of notes is not enough to express what I want to with that particular instrument, I can dive into the percussion folder, take that guitar, drop it on the main screen here. And now I've got really full access to it. I'll hit that question mark again. You can see low closed, high closed, open, all different elements, all the different ways to play it, and some pre-recorded fills and phrases and alternate articulations. So the patterns now, instead of playing the entire ensemble, is playing a pattern just for the guitar itself. So you have access to that if you want to handle, get down in there and micromanage and really control every element of the instrument. Speaking of control, if you click on the instrument right here, it'll actually gain access to a little submenu that allows you to flip to different sample sets of that instrument and even tune the low and high elements of just about any percussion instrument in India. Let's go back to the ensemble though, because it's so much fun. I'm not quite done with it yet. So we'll take that ensemble and drag it back in here and load it up again. Now, in this case, I've got that pattern again. Let me listen to it. There's a lot of different ways that I can customize that pattern. I'm going to open up the pattern sequencer itself. So I'll click the edit button right here and take a look at the pattern. It's a standard 4/4 pattern right now. It's broken up into 4 measures. Each element can be soloed and you can listen to it. So if I want to hear the tabla groove, I'll just solo it and play it back. Notice that these buttons here too, they represent the different beats of the measure. I see the quarter note right there. And it doesn't mean that there's just one note playing, although sometimes it could be. It just means that something is happening on that beat. If I take elements out of that beat, we'll hear the groove will change. Let's take a few out in a couple of different places. And as you can hear, it happens very naturally. It just sounds like the person isn't playing anything there. It doesn't sound like we're just missing a beat or a note. So it works pretty quickly and naturally when you're going to adjust things there. This is all related to the mod wheel too, because if you take a look, the mod wheel will let me transition from a lighter groove to a heavier groove right up here. So what I can do is I'll solo one element of this again. This time I'll check out that guitar once again. And if I adjust the mod wheel, you can hear that it's not just getting quieter, it's getting less busy. So remember, those dots are representing stuff happening on the beat. Less stuff can happen, but something is still happening on each of those beats. So I think that's a really handy way to customize your pattern. You can kind of get a smooth transition between every possible type and level of intricacy and involvement with these patterns as you start working with them. The rhythms in this case are authentic classic Indian as well as contemporary. And if I want to switch to different patterns, I can rotate them down here by just going to the different notes that would trigger the pattern. But I can also browse the patterns and go through. So I've got this pattern browser here. I can check out some sparse patterns. Just pick one, double click it, and load it up. Now, if I like this pattern and I want to open it up in my MIDI sequencer and get a little bit more deeply involved with it, I can use the MIDI drag and drop function located right here. I just click, drag it, and drop it outside, and there's my MIDI file. Or if I'm going to use a sequencer, I've got the ability to drop it directly into the sequencer if it's compatible. Any edits that you might have made to the groove in this screen are also applied to the MIDI file, so you'll get what you made here. I'm going to load up that Lakshmi pattern once again, and we'll lighten it up a little bit just to check out the feel and intensity knobs. So right here on the bottom right, I can do some other sweeping general adjustments to things. The feel will adjust the rhythmic sort of looseness and humanization of the pattern. When it's set to 12 o'clock, you've got a nice mix. It doesn't feel too mechanical, but there's definitely not too much looseness either. It's pretty tight. As I rotate it counterclockwise, it's going to get very heavily quantized and mechanical. As I rotate it clockwise, you definitely feel it open up a little bit and get a little more loose. Again, back in the center is probably a good place to be most of the time. With the intensity, you've also got the ability to adjust how hard those people are hitting those instruments. But the cool thing I love about the intensity knob is that it really stays authentic. Not every instrument decays at the same rate. Take a listen. You can definitely hear that drone in those melodic instruments not decaying quite as fast because they don't have the dynamic range that a percussion instrument that you're really sort of manipulating with your fingers and hands has. Let's jump into one of the solo melodic instruments. I'm going to open up the Santur. So I'll just go to that folder and drag that NKI instrument in. Now with the Santur, I've got a drone accompaniment. In fact, I have that with all of the melodic instruments. So if I hit play, I can get a nice drone going that I can play over. That drone is adjustable in the mixer. So I can get in there and really adjust it. Now, there are key switches for these instruments. You can check them out by clicking on the little question mark here. And you can see that if I use those key switches, I can add in some ornamentations. So I can hold down D1 and have an articulation, the short up articulation, or the short down articulation. And I also have access to some elements of the droning nature of this instrument, playing the root and the fifth or the high octave as well. I'm going to jump on over to a different instrument. Let's just check out that sitar. Now with the sitar, if I want to make some adjustments to the sitar itself, I could just click on it and I have the ability to adjust the release and resonance of the instrument. A pretty cool feature. And speaking of ornaments, making them happen with key switches is not the only way. I can open up the scale editor. So I'll click on this edit button and I can decide for a certain degree of the scale to have an ornament. So I'll go to the second degree of the scale. Right now it's a D flat. We'll talk about why it's a D flat in a moment. So I'll pick an ornament, and in this case I'll pick a slide up. So when I play the second note of the scale, you hear that little slide. And by the way, it works in every octave. Now, if you get in there and you turn on a lot of different ornaments and different scale values, and you don't feel like turning them off one at a time, you can turn them on and off here in the bottom right-hand corner. All of them at once. I'm going to turn it back off again. Now, these scales are organized into a library right here. There are scales or ragas available from both North and South India, as well as some traditional Western scales. So I don't have to live with the scale that they've given me here. I can go in and pick a different one, and you'll see the effect that it has on the harmonic content and melodic content above. Now, what does that mean, just because they're displaying it? Well, I'm in mapped key mode right now, which is actually my favorite for this instrument. What that does is it highlights the keys that are correct for that scale down at the bottom. See? If I play those blue notes, I'll stay in the scale. But the great news is everything is mapped. So if I play C, D flat, well, let's say I forgot and I played C to D instead, it still gives me a D flat. It guesses and says, I think you meant to play that note, and it keeps me in the key. I can switch to easy mode if I don't want to use the black notes at all, and it will map that scale out only using the white notes. And of course, I can go to guide mode, which is the notes are fully chromatic. I can still play a D now by accident. Whoops. But the guide is showing me where the notes belong. This enhancement really takes shape if you have a complete control keyboard. If you have the complete control, you'll see the notes illuminated in front of you so that you can really see what's going on. So you have a lot of scales to choose from, but don't worry, you can always go to chromatic as well. So up here in the snapshots, I can just pick the chromatic scale. And then you can just trigger the ornaments using the key switches in a standard manner. So as you can see, there's a lot of options in the both melodic and rhythmic side of India. It's a dynamic instrument. It's really customizable, and you can get in there and use the sort of pattern and groove-based nature of it, or have full control and play everything you want to with your fingertips. So it's India from Native Instruments. I'm Matt Banacoro from MacProVideo.com and AskVideo.com. And it's been my pleasure checking out India with you today.